G'day guys, Adam Cogan here from SSW TV, live at NDC Sydney. And I have with me Mr. Richard Campbell, all the way from Canada. Hey Rich.
Hey Mitty, how you doing?
Great to see you.
Good to see you too.
This is awesome. Here we are at this super productive conference to get ourselves really...
all the latest gizmos, all
Yes.
the coolest software.
And you're here talking about trust.
Yeah, funny, huh?
Yes. Now, we used to always talk about how do we get more productive? And you've talked about that forever. What tools to use? Why are you talking about trust now?
Well, trust is an incredible productivity tool. You can move a lot faster with a team that trusts each other than you can with a team that doesn't trust each other.
And when did this start becoming a popular thing to talk about rather than just productivity?
You know, it's funny you say that because I never thought about talking about this. I was pretty much asked to talk about this about more than a year ago, and I didn't think, like, who's an expert in trust? I don't know if there is anyone who's actually an expert in it, but it is a realization I had many years ago working with high-performing teams. You sort of have that moment where you say, what makes this team work so well? You know, why are they able to get so much done? And part of it was they trusted each other so much. They weren't afraid to fail in front of each other. They weren't afraid to take chances together. There wasn't a lot of blame going on. There was analysis of problems and acceptance that they could be better. You know, the kindness within the team made all the difference. They just did more in less time.
So one of the things that I think that you think is important is employees need to feel safe. Why is it important for an employee to feel safe?
Well, I think safe and trust are factors together, right? If I am unsafe, there's no way I can trust the people that are around me. So then what you really have to get into is defining what safety at work actually means. And one aspect I certainly focus on in the conversation there is feeling safe to admit failures, to admit mistakes or problems. Often we have so much pressure on us in a business to succeed. There's very low tolerance for anything going wrong. And if the consequences of things going wrong are very high, then people are very careful. That's a low trust environment. They don't feel safe. I'm afraid to make any mistakes. And so I will take no chances and I'll take no ownership.
Interesting. If you think about the so Brian Harry, a distinguished engineer at Microsoft, one of his last two blog posts was on giving feedback and taking feedback well, which I thought was an interesting way to kind of finish his blog series. And and he had moved to a service, like he'd moved TFS to Azure DevOps, the service, and they were having lots of outages, and he was spending a lot of time telling the community about how we made these mistakes and apologizing, etc. So one of the things you mentioned was Daniel Pink and how he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Yes.
Can you tell me what that is and why it's important?
It's a lovely book. The book's called Drive. Although if you want the shorthand, there's an RSA video on YouTube that is a pretty good summary of it. It's very quick, but it really talks to, especially in technology workers, but as soon as you get away from sort of the basic labor type work for income, wages aren't a driver of productivity after a certain threshold. And certainly in technology, you hit that threshold almost immediately. And so as you try and understand as an employer or as a leader of a team, how do I incent my team? What Drive really talks about is the things that people want. Once you get past that wage metric are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And it's so autonomy being the ability to work on the things you want to work on, whether that be tooling or the environments that you work, all of those sorts of things. Mastery being opportunities to push against the edges of your skills. Often as an employer, I'm not actually wanting my team to work at the 100%, to the top level of the capability, where the risk of mistakes is higher. I want them more at the 80%. That's good for me, but it may not be good for my employee. They actually want to press against the edges of the skills. So how do we make room for that to be true? And then finally, purpose, which again is like, money is not the motivator. What's the motivator? And that's building meaningful things, building things that people use. And you always get a strong reaction from a room of developers when you talk about the idea that it's easy for folks who don't build software to think that the building is the joy. That's all we actually care about until you actually talk to someone who spent a year on a piece of software that no one ever used. So utilization is easily important, and purpose, software that makes a difference, is part of that. The purpose comes in lots of different forms, right? And that really equates back to this large concept of values. What do we value as an organization? What does my team value as a whole? And where those values align, you find trust.
One of the things, like, I'm just equating that back to, run SSW, how I feel about that. And I don't have a problem with mastery. All the guys are really smart. They've all gone and got degrees there.
That's fine, but mastery never ends,
yes,
right?
So
that's really a challenge.
Yeah.
Is there room for them to continue to grow?
So I don't perceive that as a problem. They're all, I don't need to motivate them. They're pretty self-motivated. I feel that, I certainly know the purpose of SSW. I feel most of them do. But then I've got that autonomy, that one that grinds at me, because I like stuff being done consistently.
Sure.
I like building solutions in a consistent method. I'm not into total autonomy because I want aligned autonomy.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with
part
that.
of the problem.
That's part of the purpose piece too, right? And autonomy means that they at least get to choose. So where I find folks that really struggle for autonomy is when they have a skill that's the only thing they're allowed to ever work on or utilize, and they want to press against other skills. So do we give room for them to choose projects, to choose roles in projects? Often we find someone who's a great PM who started out as a coder and they actually miss coding, and a bit of autonomy, being able to go back to the other kind of work, to have some choice in what they do. It's very easy. And again, you've got a great organization in the sense that you're very aware of developers and what they care about. Often developers are mysterious people in organizations, and they get treated more as the cog in the machine. Just keep doing the same thing you've been doing. That's been valuable for us. So autonomy really comes down to having some choice. Now, certainly, as the one owning and operating the business, you get to put some parameters around those choices. Because one aspect of autonomy is going to go somewhere else, right? So we do provide room for autonomy. It's just a question of how broad that space is, and it's sufficient for most people.
All right. I often think of it's less about total autonomy, but it's very important that you have your voice, what you say, and having a place to try to influence others so you get your aligned autonomy.
Sure. And so part of a value system in a trusted organization is that ability to hear from everyone, right? Is that sense of collaboration, that we're not necessarily being directed from one point of view, but that all points of view are accounted for. Often people just want to be heard, that giving air to their thoughts, giving the autonomy of being affected, right, that we can actually hear what they say, even if we don't completely change what we're doing, but we are affected by what they say, is a sense of autonomy.
So I obviously want to talk about building trust and eroding trust, but is there exceptions to situations? Like, obviously, if you work in the military, there's not, you do as you're told, move forward.
Sure.
Is there times like when you have an event coming up and there's 4 days, we sometimes just do what you're told? Is there exceptions to this?
Well, often, I would also disagree with you on the military. The military operates at a very high level of trust by having a very rigorous set of rules that everyone is trained on, so they can move quickly. It's actually a byproduct of a high level of trust. I would say in the crush of the 4 days before an event is when you exercise trust. We haven't got time to build trust all the time. We build it when we can so that we can put it to work when we need to. So I think everyone perceives hard deadlines and the sprint to the finish. Those are kind of fun as long as you're not doing them all the time, right? We do get into poisoned situations where it's constant sprinting and there's never a chance to take a breath and never a chance to do an accounting of the cost of a sprint, because they're not free. We do cut corners, right? We've seen this in software. We've seen this in event implementations because we had to get to good enough in the deadline that we had. You want to re-energize the trust in a team after a sprint. It's the retrospective and the admission of corners that were cut that should be fixed. That's very trusting. That means the next time you sprint, it's like, okay, I know I could take some chances and we'll make it right eventually. Right? Those are moments of trust that allow us to vary our speed. You can't ask me to run all the time. But if when you do ask me to run, you give me a chance to capture my breath afterwards, I'm going to trust you more the next time you need me to run.
has the movement to agile and Scrum done to build trust?
I think it was a recognition that we needed trust in the system, right? That agile became a structure where you could increase communication. If you think about what the Agile Manifesto talks about more than anything else, it's about communicating with all stakeholders, with the folks that use the software and the folks that build the software and the people that control the purse strings. Those are all opportunities to grow trust. So Agile's manifesto really was a codification of building trust into the process.
So I'd like to talk about eroding trust before building trust, because obviously you can do a lot of eroding trust. An in-person situation, how do you make sure that the other person feels listened to?
Well, I think it starts with a conversation about values rather than goals, right? That you ultimately trust represents a set of shared values. So when I'm trying to press against trust, before I do, I kind of take a step back and discuss the values that we share, right? That we're kind of on the same side of things. If we're a long way apart in values, we really actually trust each other, right? We don't agree with some key things. Now, I'm not asking everyone to be perfectly aligned on all things, that we at least know where each other's coming from. But when you see a mismatch in values is often when you see people interpreting the same sentence completely differently because they literally see it differently. So I think it takes longer to work through that process, but the alternative of moving quickly when values aren't aligned is eroding trust further. So you need to work on that first. Often you can't have conversations that are difficult or are contentious if you haven't already spent some time on that trust.
Time together.
Yeah. Well, there's really no other way. Right. Trust doesn't happen quickly, right? It's expensive, right, but it's worth it. It's also not required. Like you can make low trust teams that are productive. They're not as productive as high trust teams, right? It's really a question of what you want. You're also going to find some personalities in the world that have very challenging approaches to their values, and they may be productive, but they're not that kind of person that you're going to trust them that way. And I don't want to exclude them. They're still useful, right? They can still be a part of a team, but you got to kind of accept where they're coming from.
Do you tell me if you don't feel comfortable? But do you feel comfortable if we just do a role play?
Absolutely.
You be the boss. I'll be the lead developer.
Mm-hmm.
Richard, I know that you're trying to choose a mobile solution, and all these guys in the company are talking to you about native solutions, React and Xamarin. I've heard all the conversations. You know that I'm the best developer here. I'm your lead developer. You never listen to me. I've told you PWAs are the way to go, and you don't. I just feel that you just don't believe me anymore. Why?
Well, listen, obviously I hear you, right? I'm very aware that you think PWAs are the right way. I just think I disagree, right? That doesn't mean I don't listen to you. I'm just not always going to agree with you either. Now, there's clearly a reason why we're picking one stack or the other, and it's not always just the technical solution. There's more to any deliverable than just the technical solution. Part of it is the skill set we have available to us. So when I see folks are advocating different stacks that they're competent in, that's a value as well. Now, you understand, for anyone to come at you like that speaks to a trust problem in the first place. And anytime I hear absolutes, like you never listen to me, like that's false, right? So you're dealing with an emotional reaction, not a logical reaction. And so more importantly is to deal with the emotion. Now, I didn't do that in my response. I gave you a logical response, and it actually wouldn't help. The better thing to do in a moment like that is to find out why they're upset. Because I guarantee you it's not because you didn't pick PWAs.
Interesting.
Right?
Almost
certainly.
I would think that developers, like anyone, see that the decision you're going to make as the boss is going to affect what they're building for the next potential 6 months. And they don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to build what they honestly think is the wrong thing.
Well, I'm betting you don't think it's the wrong thing. But they're also not in a high trust state where it's like, I know you're competent as the boss, you're choosing this. I just don't understand why you're choosing this. And that's not the thing he expressed to me. He expressed anger to me, right? You never listened to me. I would rather unpack that. As someone who really cares that my people are happy, I want to know why I feel so enraged. Because this is not an enraging thing, right? We're picking a stack, and heck, we could change our minds. Like it's actually not that big a deal. If you came at me wondering why we're making that choice, we could talk about that, but that's not the expression, right? So now I'm more concerned about everything else.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
As soon as I hear absolutes, I know there's more going on than a decision in front of us.
Okay.
Because it's not an absolute thing. So why are they that frustrated? It's usually not technology.
Okay.
Technology is not that frustrating. Listen, we know that tech could do it. You know that mobile app would work as a PWA or a Xamarin app or all those other stacks. If it didn't work that way, these would be much easier choices. The real question is, why is this team struggling? Which means, why are these people struggling? So as a good team leader, I really want to know the struggles of my individuals, know their strengths and weaknesses, know what actually worries them. Because if I can get on board with that, I've built a lot of trust with them, that I'm really looking out for them for what's important. Then we can actually deal with the technical stuff. A lot of that gets a lot easier when you get into the more significant parts of how they feel about things.
So could we switch mediums to, typing? Okay, instant messenger or email.
Yep.
Emails off. Let's just talk about how do you build trust with, non.
You pretty much can't.
You can?
Pretty much can't. No.
You can't.
No.
You can't build trust
Via
over
email? No. Email is where you exercise trust. And arguably do damage to it too, because email is such a restrictive medium. High trust individuals, two people who trust each other a lot. Like, why does instant messenger work so much amongst friends, where it's not something you'd ever do in business? Because it counts on existing trust. You have trust between your friends. You automatically presume the tone of a text message is positive because you know your friend, right? These low bandwidth communication means are at best a challenge to trust. Growing trust is about sharing values, and in the typed form of that, doesn't communicate that well.
Wow. I have worked hard to make sure our emails at SSW are higher quality and to a degree building trust.
Well, that's not a bad thing at all. I just don't know that it would actually grow trust so much as it exercises it, proves that it exists. So there's some validation there, but you can't take someone who isn't already in a high trust state and put them into that and expect it to necessarily get better.
Right.
The fact that you build formal structure on that, we have a value of clear and coherent communication, that we share, that we trust each other to do that, and we show that in email, great validation in high trust. But it's not easy to get people up there. You've got to spend some time first. Get on that positive cycle of trust in the first place, and that's a good place to demonstrate the values that we have.
So one of the things that I have tried my best, we have all our rules to better email, but of course we say one of the most important things is to write as per our conversation. So you draft your email, you give them a call, you modify the email based on what you've chatted about,
right?
Sent. If you don't get them, you put, I tried to get you, but you're unavailable. And we call over another colleague often and put, check by Yuli.
Right.
Like, this message to the group or to a person has been validated, not just by me, by somebody else.
Sure.
So I try to build some trust via email, but it's hard.
I think it's also a sense that this is not a secret communication. We are all in this together. Like, I think those are all good values that we share and then manifest in these different forms. Not a bad thing at all. And I like that you want to go voice, because voice is a form that's more effective for building trust, that your inflections and your sound and your pacing are part of expressing values to people that they understand. So, I think you're already pressing against those, even if you don't articulate it that particular way, that we have these different mediums, and the wider the bandwidth of that medium, the face-to-face meaning being one of the most potent ones, the easier it is to communicate values.
Do you mind if I do one more role play on email this time?
Sure.
Okay. So you as the boss send out an email and you go, hi guys, developers. I would like to talk to you about what we're going to choose for our mobile framework. I'm thinking that there's a few different frameworks out there. I'm happy to hear your opinions on React Native, Flutter, Xamarin, etc. And then the lead developer replies, I think I have the most experience here. You should be going PWAs over and out.
Right.
Now, what do you do with that? Do you respond? Do you let it go?
My automatic reaction to that is we need to have a meeting.
Do you say that on email?
Absolutely. Let's get together and talk this through in person, because that's not a constructive response. That's not a supportive response. That doesn't reflect the values of the group of being inclusive around making those decisions. And so as soon as I see a difference in value there from the rest of the team, I want to bring us together and exercise and talk through values again. That I don't see that person as more equal than everyone else, that all people's opinions are relevant and valid. And that was a strike against that belief. So let's go press against it. And I would also seriously consider before the main meeting, maybe having a one-on-one with that person saying, listen, I want to remind you that these are the values of this group. And it's really important to us. And if you don't share them, we need to talk through this. It's important. We're now going to get in front of everyone. And if you aren't going to support the value system, then we really have to think about how we're going to proceed. That was a very clear statement against the values of the email that you expressed in the first place. So, it's a breach of trust, right? Essentially.
I'm going to finish with asking you about a book. You mentioned a book that I haven't read called The Power of Full Engagement.
Yes.
Can you tell me why yesterday you said that was an important book?
I included that one because a lot of arguments around trust have to do with time management. It takes too long. And the argument for me back came from the powerful engagement, which is we all have the same amount of time, that effective time management is actually energy management. It's how we recharge our batteries and how we work at our highest levels, what we have to do in a given day. You can't just keep hammering rocks all day. Sometimes you need to put it down and stretch. And then sometimes you need to eat. So that process of figuring out what it is for you personally that recharges you, that brings up your energy level so that you're at your most effective, the productivity of someone at a high energy level in a short amount of time, in an hour, can be vastly greater than someone working for 8 hours. The number of times I've worked late in the night trying to pound on a coding problem, slept, and immediately solved it as soon as I woke up. I should have stopped sooner, gotten more rest, recharge my energy, clear my head, and go again. And so you want to be able to achieve all these things. Managing your energy ends up being the actual gatekeeper. And that's what I got inspired from that particular book. And suddenly the time I take to build trust, because it creates such dividends in people's personal productivity after there, it energizes the team to know their team has their backs, that they can take a chance and make a mistake and say, oh, I did this. And everyone's like, far out. Now we know not to do that again. Here's how we're going to correct it next time. Let's keep going. That raises energy.
So energy management is more important than time management.
Time management gets trivial when energy is high. It goes so quickly. Because ultimately, why are you managing time? Because you have a limited amount of productivity. So if you learn how to up your productivity in smaller amounts of time, you have a lot more time.
So if you have been having conflict with a team member or conflict at home and you come to work, do you work on something different because your energy is different that day?
I think your energy, anytime you have conflict, you've burned a lot of energy on that. You're going to be less productive.
Right.
And we've all been in this situation where we didn't know what to do, and so we went to work and they sent us home. After my second child was born, we got everything squared away, and you're kind of like, I don't know what to do now. I went to work, and I sort of stumbled around in work for a while until finally the office manager's like, you should go home because your energy's just not there. Right? Like you're not going to be able to focus. Like she was genuinely worried I'm going to do damage to the place because I was so out of it. Right? That's a very extreme example. Right. But then just to be clear, like giving people room to say like, I'm dealing with some stuff and say, hey, go deal with that. Because if they get it resolved, the net productivity you get back is so much larger than them slugging through the thing they're not paying attention to. Right? That's a very tight team. Like you've got to have a PM who's on the ball and is able to see when people are checked in and checked out and can find a way to get to the results. But when you're truly clear-headed and doing your work, the productivity level is so much larger. And we've all had that feeling. That flow where suddenly every piece of code you're writing is beautiful and fast and clean, and you're getting results, versus that I am just smashing my forehead on the keyboard for 8 hours, right? And arguably I've actually dug a bigger hole in my programming problem than I had filled it in. Right? I'm pretty careful these days when I get a chance to actually do any code. It's like, am I making this worse or better?
So I feel that I don't want to let you go, Rich, because we've talked a lot about not building trust or dealing with that and not how you build the trust. And so I just want to, if you could quickly just talk about a couple of things to build trust, just so we've got something on the other side of the ledger.
The simplest thing at work is just to sort of acknowledge that when you're working is not a good time to build trust. It's when you're mostly exercising it. And the only time typically in work that we actually are not working, when we can really discuss values, is lunch. And so I always encourage team leaders or folks that are responsible for team to plan their lunch as well. Because humans are hardwired to trust people they eat with. And so take advantage of this natural, brain reaction to eating together, to get to know someone better, to trade values, essentially, right? And same with group meals and so forth. Outside of work gets more challenging. Often people, they have lives, and you need to include that in any decision-making around when we're going to share values. One of the stories I tell in the talk was about coming to appreciate it at Strange Loop, at one of the companies I was heavily involved in. We had a real strong culture around poverty and food. And so one of the things we did as a group was we went and worked at a food bank, just packing boxes. It's not hard work for anyone, much less a group of programmers. But that turned out to be really useful, because once you figure out how many cans of lima beans need to go in each box, you don't have to think about it a whole lot more. And we all started talking to each other. And you're not necessarily talking about work, but you're talking about ultimately what's important to you. And those shared values, starting with the shared value of serving the poor, was part of that, but it became so much more. Right? And that ultimately gets reflected in work. You know what I notice in a real high trusted team? Everybody has nicknames. And you know where they came from? They came from stuff like packing boxes, right? You don't tend to get the nickname at work, right? It's those other things that happen that ultimately are symbols of moments of trust and collaboration that become names for everyone.
Oh, wow. Yes, I hadn't thought of that.
That's where they come from. And so for us as organizers, for us as team leads, how do we create opportunities for that to happen? Right? Meals are an easy one. Your lunch and learn's an interesting time. The right offsite, the right time when you can bring folks together on something that everyone values, done the right way. If you've got a company with a bunch of young families, get some child minding.
Well, that's why families that eat together every night are probably more
hugely
happy.
Absolutely. It's an incredible force, and I absolutely recommend it. Right. And without technology too, like eat together and talk to each other. Right?
That's why we get along so well. We've eaten so much together.
We have eaten a lot together.
Yeah,
I would just say the size of meal not important. I mean, maybe for us, but really not that important.
And the guy behind the camera, he's a nickname, Raji Dadi.
There you go. So. And I'm sure we can track back the event where that name came from.
Yeah, from my daughter, actually.
Yeah, it's part of it.
So thanks so much for that time together, Richard. I learned plenty, and I learned how important eating is together. And with that, let's go and have lunch. And this is Adam Cogan signing off for SSW TV.